Hello? Is this heaven's door?
It is. Who's there? Wait. Don't tell us. It's Steve and Jason from the Dreams That Shape Us podcast. What can we do for you?
We want to know how to follow our dreams to heaven, and we thought you might know someone we could ask how to do it.
We have many here in the afterlife, but we think you may be looking for someone who's still living the dream on Earth. Someone on your side of the veil. There's a certain professor in Texas who can help here. He has mastered the way of the dream.
Sweet. Who is it?
Professor Scott Sparrow.
Has he seen the light? You know, the light of heaven. We heard about a sacred practice called dream yoga, and the masters of it can visit heaven in their dreams.
Professor Sparrow has seen that light, but guys, there's something you should know.
Yeah?
You follow your dreams to heaven every night of your mortal life. The professor will explain.
Our modern Western culture places little to no value on the power of our nightly dreams
to inspire, shift, and reorganize our lives.
This podcast demands a deep reconsideration of
the role our dreams play on our path to a more vital
and meaningful life. The following is living proof
of the life-affirming power of dreams
to effect change
and redirect the trajectory
of our inner and outer lives. These
are our dreams that shape us.
Dreams that shape us.
Jung once said, "We have simply forgotten the age-old fact that God speaks chiefly through dreams and vision." This quote is actually how Jason and I met. I posted a meme with this quote on it to the International Association of the Study of Dreams Facebook page. Some guy decided to pick a fight with me over it, and Jason, the handsome white knight that he is, rode into the rescue out of nowhere, and now look at us. A couple cuties. I love you, man. All that to say, dreams have always been the chief way that God, or whatever word you would rather use, has spoken to me. Dreams actually led me to my spiritual awakening, so I actually have no idea what walking a spiritual path as an adult feels like without having a deeply nourishing relationship with dreams. But it really feels like you'd only be living like half your life. Like you'd be missing half of yourself. Like this huge reservoir within you, this beautiful companion, it's just so hard for me to reconcile, especially when I meet spiritual people who don't have a deep relationship with their dreams. It's like, or just even people in general. I mean, it's really hard. But in this episode, we get to hear just how deep it goes, from dreams being messages from God to having full-on experiences of the holy light itself. Our guest, Scott Sparrow, is a mutual friend of Jason and I actually had the privilege to meet him in Tucson this past summer with Jason, and he is genuinely one of the most special human beings that I think that I've ever met. And you'll get a sense for why that is when you listen to him speak and listen to how he speaks. Scott shares with us a whole slew of dreams over many decades that showcases how his direct experience in lucid dreams of the sacred light has deeply and profoundly shaped his life. It is such a gorgeous testament to how our dreams are truly such a deep and visceral way for us to make direct connection with our divine source. We really hope that you truly enjoy this very special conversation.
Hello, listeners of the Dreams That Shape Us podcast. This is your co-host, J.M. DeBoard, and I have with me today Scott Sparrow. Scott is our special guest, and we have a special topic to talk about. Scott is a special dreamer. What he has experienced in his dreams is beyond even most of the stories that I've heard of people who have encounters with beings of light and spiritual guides and religious figures. And Scott is going to share with us today how they've shaped his life. And he also wants to talk about the steps that you and I and others can take to have those experiences for themselves. There's a method, there's a process to follow. There are practices that you can do. And Scott's going to share some of those with us. And he's also going to share some of these extraordinary dreams. Scott, thank you for joining us. I'm looking at you across a Zoom camera right now. You're in McAllen, Texas. And you are a past president of the Association for the Study of Dreams, and you're still very actively involved with the group. Right. It's the world's premier academic organization for the study of dreams. And Scott is also a professor at the University of Texas and at Rio Grande. And you teach counseling, I believe, is the...
Correct.
Scott, would you like to tell the listeners anything else about you that will help them to kind of anchor into this discussion and know who you are and where you're coming from?
Sure. Some people might know of me as one of the first people to write about lucid dreaming back in the early 70s, when people weren't aware of lucid dreaming much. So I wrote a master's thesis and a doctoral dissertation in that first decade of discovering lucid dreaming myself. And so that's what I've done over the years. I've studied lucid dreaming, but I've also done clinical dream analysis in my private practice for 40 years, where I've kind of built a approach to clinical dream analysis based on lucid dreaming. So, but I think the thing to share here is the first lucid dream I had was an experience of light, which to me was much bigger than the fact I was aware I was dreaming. That was secondary. I wasn't even interested in that part. So in a way, this topic today is much more precious to me than the topic of lucid dreaming per se.
You were the first person in Western culture to publish about lucid dreaming. This would have been a couple of years before Robert Wagner's book came out, correct?
Right. There was one book on lucid dreaming published in England by Celia Green called Lucid Dreams. But there was nothing other than that, except go way back in the early 20th century. But it had been forgotten. So the work I did was fairly new, first in North America.
What do you think led to having that first lucid dream? Was it spontaneous, or was there something you were doing as a practice that made you ready for it?
I was starting to meditate, and I was kind of immersed in a lot of chaos at the first semester at the university. So there's a lot happening, a lot of turmoil. So I started meditating, and I think the meditation may have been the catalyst.
Was there a particular type of meditation?
I was just getting into Edgar Cayce's approach to meditation, where you would use an affirmation, pretty much like an Eastern practitioner would use a mantra, where you use a phrase to focus on. This happened to be in English rather than Sanskrit, but that was my basic practice, using a short prayer and then try to get into the silence. Simple as that. But I would do it in the early morning or middle of the night too sometimes. And I think that was the big difference. That's what probably brought about these experiences of light.
Cayce does recommend that if you wake up spontaneously in the middle of the night, that you use that time for prayer and meditation. And we know that we used to sleep in a biphasic sleep pattern before modern lighting and alarm clocks and all the things that have come with an electrified world. before we could just flip on a light, we used to go to bed when the sun went down. And then we would often wake up in the middle of the night and be awake for an hour or two. And records show that there was a very popular activity that people would do in the middle of the night, other than pray and meditate. Do you know what that is, Scott?
You tell me.
Okay. Well, there is there is something else.
There's something else
now.
Sure.
But along the lines of the conversation we're having here, it was journaling their dreams.
All right.
So, and I have found that those dreams that I can remember from the first half of the night tend to have a different flavor to them. And that just before I wake up in the middle of the night, I've usually come out of a REM cycle. And my dreaming mind seems to know that I'll pay attention. So oftentimes hit me with really important dreams, the ones that I have just before I wake up in the middle of the night. So Edgar Cayce is most famous as an American psychic. He was known as the sleeping prophet. But what a lot of people don't know is that he was a pretty extraordinary dream worker too. He didn't really analyze a dream. He said that when he interpreted a dream, he interpreted the person because he had his clairvoyant ability to be able to understand that person at a very essential sort of soul level. So he didn't have to necessarily interpret the dream. He could look at the person and then look at the dream content and be able to make that connection. It's more like shining a light into that person's heart and spirit to see what's going on there. To lead into the first dream that you want to talk about, what got you involved with Cayce?
My best female friend from childhood was involved in Cayce. And I would often be cynical when she would tell me things about him. And I didn't immediately warm up to the idea of meditating or believing in past lives or dream work. But eventually, when I went to school at UT Austin, she was there and several of her friends were there, and they became my group. And I suddenly woke up to the desire to search spiritually, specifically with the first dream I have to share. This happened to me before I was really fully on board, but it brought me on board as a conscious seeker.
Let's get into it with the idea in mind that Scott's dreams opened up a world for him that was, shall we say, unknown to him at the time, that deep inner world of spirit. But when these dreams came to you, they opened up a door for you to have an experience of life that you can look back on now, and you can see that something was working you, and it was coming through your dreams to come and find you and kind of stake its claim to you, in a way.
Well put.
We have had other guests who've told us that something came through their dreams and said, I'm here, you're there, let's connect. And it seems to have an awareness and intelligence of its own beyond the way that dreams can work a person in, in the traditional sorts of ways. We're talking about a deep spiritual experience. So, this leads us into the first dream that you want to share with me and the listener. So we'd love to hear it. Go ahead.
Sure. It was my first semester at the university, and I just finished up the first semester. And I just started meditating. And one night, I dreamt that I was returning home, my place where I lived in Austin. And I was carrying my books. And suddenly I realized I was dreaming. So I became lucid. And first time I'd ever had that experience. I was like, wow, it's so real. I didn't say this is a dream. I said, this is real. This is real.
Yeah.
Which didn't make a bit of sense. But so I carry my books to these large black double doors that have brass handles on them. And it's supposed to be my apartment, right? But it doesn't look a thing like it. So I open the doors. As soon as I start to crack open the doors, I am overwhelmed by white light that's pouring through from the interior. And the effect on me is beyond words. People have tried to describe this, but it's like being home, completely happy, completely full of purpose and love and a sense of amazing possibilities, just nothing in the way. So I walked in this state of ecstasy, and the light was pouring out of these light sources. And it was like a little chapel or a little haven. And I walked around alone. Nobody was there. And I found myself carrying a crystal rod about, a half an inch in diameter. And at the top of it was spinning a glass circle that was flat like the rings of Saturn. It was spinning in midair around the tip of the rod, and light was pouring through it. And I could see the amazing refracted spectral light coming through the rod. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what the purpose was. I kept asking myself, what is the purpose of this? But I came out of it. And I've ever since, it's been over 50 years, when I think of that dream, I can still feel it. It anointed me with something that never has left. I feel like it instilled something in me, fixed something in me permanently. That was a feeling, a sense of purpose, and a sense of possibility. That is it's a unique feeling. And it's just so totally set apart from the rest of normal emotions. If even it can be called an emotion, it's more of a constellation of feelings and perceptions.
We know that the circle as a dream symbol is a classic symbol of the self and the process of finding wholeness within oneself. If I was to try to take a crack at analyzing this dream in a traditional sort of way, I would begin with that circle. I can see in the background of your office there, you've got what would be considered a mandala, circle within a circle image. The circle within the circle in particular is known as a dream symbol for the self. But what I'd like to do, though, is, Scott, you are very familiar with dream interpretation and analysis and the schools of thought and concepts and theories and stuff that go into it. Would traditional dream interpretation and analysis do you any good with a dream like that?
I don't think so. I think this fits in a developmental frame. And I've come to understand it over the years. At the time, I didn't understand how it fit into my life and what it was foreshadowing. But I see it as very similar to what happened in the mythology of the Holy Grail. Parsifal, as you might recall if you read that story, has a kind of a lucky experience at the beginning of his youthful life. He finds himself to the Grail castle. He discovers it, goes in, sees the Grail, and has an amazing, overwhelming experience. And then he wakes up and everything's gone. He doesn't know what happened, why he's no longer in it. He wants to find it. He doesn't know why it's been lost. But in a sense, his life was defined now by wanting to get back. And so I think that this dream for me was like an activator, because when I woke up, I thought, that's what I want in my life. Anyway, whatever I need to do. So it's like being given a vision of the end of the road and then set about the task of getting back to it. So everything that happened between then and now has been a journey, right? Going through the various obstacles in the way, the unconscious sleeping dogs in my psyche, to try to get to that place where I could hold that in my life and not just have it as a flash in the pan. And Parsifal got back, as you know in the story, but he had to wake up. He had to do a lot of good work. And finally, when he went back, he did the right thing. He was a mature guy and no longer just kind of a babe in the spectacle of this light.
I'm seeing a lot of parallels. You open up the doors with the brass knobs and you're overwhelmed with light.
Yeah, like the Grail Castle.
The Grail Castle. I know there's going to be a lot of listeners who are going to be like, huh? Because they're not familiar with the mythopoetic line. There's a whole branch of the dream interpretation tree that's called the mythopoetic school. And there were writers such as Robert Bly, Joseph Campbell, to an extent, Dr. Robert Moore and his King, Warrior, Magician, Lover series dipped into mythology and archetypes and stuff. So
Robert Johnson, right?
Robert Johnson,
which was about Parsifal and the Holy Grail. So he was Jungian.
So he, the psychology of the male psyche, and also she explores a different mythology, but it's taking you to the same place. So we've just dropped a name and a book that anybody out there who's going, wow, this sounds interesting, but how am I going to figure this out? Robert A. Johnson was a student of Carl Jung, actually met Jung. and also wrote a series of they're fairly short books that are just packed full of knowledge to teach people how to follow the path to their own Grail castle, meaning the thing inside of you that you find that is more precious than life itself, or it is life itself in a way. It's sort of what is described in scripture as the living spirit, or the living water that flows from the deepest core of a person. And when you bring it into your waking reality or your sleeping reality, it is an experience of ecstasy. And that sounds to me like what you experienced when you were filled with the light. So what did you have to do to return to the Grail Castle? Because Parsifal has to learn whom the Grail serves. That's the big reveal, by the way, for those who are going to read the book, is when you touch on this thing inside of you, it comes to you of its own volition. It has its own awareness, intelligence, its own agenda. It's inviting you in to have an experience, but it needs you to understand that even though you are kind of chosen, you are not the chosen one. And I mean that in the sense of a lot of people there, when they get touched by this kind of stuff, their ego blows up and they think of themselves as some kind of messiah or chosen one. And they're unable to remember that the Force or the Grail does not serve you. In fact, in the Force, the Star Wars mythology, trying to make the Force serve oneself is the path to the dark side. So the Jedi say that they are the servants of the Force. So when we say that you have to remember whom the Grail serves, it's in a way, it's kind of like the Jedi remembering that they are a servant of the Force. Is that jiving with you? And is there anything you want to expand on with that?
Yes, absolutely. I think that when we are anointed like this, we're quite often inflated. I mean, it's unavoidable. Like, wow, it must be special to have had that experience of light. I mean, what is it about me? So you have to be brought down, right? And Jung would say you need a compensatory experience so that the ego doesn't become or try to become the self too quickly. And so I had an experience very soon after that. I think I shared this with you, but so I'm going to announce my purpose in life to my parents. Big deal, right? I'm almost 21, it's a few days from my 21st birthday, literally. And the dream is I invite them outside the house to show them my purpose. So they follow me out. They're a little like hesitant, like a lot of parents might be, worried. And so I hold my hands up in the air and I begin to chant. And lightning begins to arc across the sky. Boom, boom, boom. And then I lower my arms and lightning strikes the ground 100 feet away. Boom. And then I do it again. I start chanting and the light begins to come into me. So I'm having this experience again of light. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, what is going on? There's part of me watching and not even, aware of what am I doing. Now my parents become afraid and my father picks up a lance and throws the lance into my back to put this down. Obviously it's threatening. And I'm dying. I fall to the ground with a lance in me. He walks up to me and he says, and he doesn't say anything, but I'm lying there dying and I'm just feeling sad. I said to him, I was really your son, but I'm the son of the unborn son who's still to come. And I knew it shocked him. And then I woke up.
I know I'm your son, but I am the
really
son,
your son. Yeah,
of the unborn son who is still to come. And this is going to play into some of the dreams that you're going to reveal later. But let's go back to this. The lance.
Okay. Yeah.
You know what I'm picturing in my mind as I see that, what the sense that I get is like a grounding rod. because you're dealing with lightning, right? And the lightning's coming across, blowing across the sky, and now it's starting to hit the ground. So it's, and lightning is notoriously hard to control. But one thing we know is that it can be grounded through a rod driven deep into the ground, and the lightning will go for the rod instead of for the people who might get, zapped by it. Now, that's just what I pictured. What was your sense of why your dad chose a lance to bring you down to earth?
The lance is really, really important in the Grail myths. It's a positive symbol, believe it or not. And it's used even in Christianity to signify the lance that pierced Christ's side and released the blood and water. Remember that?
Yes.
So that it's even used in communion. There's a little tool, the shape of a lance, that's used to break the communion host, right? So, but that's kind of religious connotation. But I'm just thinking that what I was doing was subversive. It challenged authority, my own super ego, my own family, values and culture, which is very constraining. Let's face it. The family structure, social society is not going to embody or embrace this kind of awakening. So the guy who was announcing his purpose was really insensitive, right? Insensitive to the constraints of the real world. And my father and parents, I think, just represented the retaliation of my own, limits, the limits of the world, the way the world treats this kind of presumption. So Jung would say necessary, right? He needs that. He needs that compensation because he's got to deal with real life, with real people. He can't just go out and announce himself as being the newest, best, whatever. Avatar of the light.
New age guru.
Guru.
That's what I got when I had that experience in my 20s, and I started, embodying the light. And boy, I was, shooting lightning bolts off in all directions. Right. And I had a guy at a party get up in my face and say, "Who do you think you are? Some kind of new age guru?" And I was like, wow, that has a ring to it, actually. I like that. But I did find also that if you can't humble yourself, that you invite an experience of being humble, because you start getting filled with this energy that also brings with it other things like psychic gifts. I found
sexuality, sure.
Yeah.
Every chakra, gets kind of activated.
Charged, yeah. Mm-hmm. A lot of clairvoyance, telepathy, precognition. All of these gifts started awakening at around the same time. And I also found that there is an archetype known as the Messiah archetype, which I was not aware of at the time, but I started seeing it in myself and in other people who had had these experiences and very quickly got full of themselves and needed that compensatory experience that Jung talks about, where the ego is reminded of its place as a servant of something larger than itself, rather than the larger thing itself. Okay, so you had that experience, and do you think that your mom and dad in the dream were kind of representations of the archetypal mom and dad, or do you think perhaps that there was maybe another layer to this that said maybe you don't want to bring this up to your real mom and dad?
Well, on the surface, they were very welcoming of my choices and my journey. They didn't get in the way, but of course, what they left me with as a child was a lot of wounds from their own struggles and divorce, etc. So they were not enemies at all. But so they represented, I think, kind of the resistive authority within me, the traditional, unaware side of life. So, but I felt like from that experience, it was scary, right? And I really started to feel like I needed a teacher. And I did have some of that starting to develop in my life. But I thought I needed a guru. So I had a friend who had a guru. I've never met the guy. He was in India, right? So I was thinking maybe I need to become initiated with the guru so that I can get guidance on how to deal with this awakening. So I had a dream of going to see this particular guru. And I thought I was going to go. I thought in the dream I was actually there, of course. So I was standing in line, waiting to see him. And he was sitting there in his robe and turban. He was a Sikh. And he was sitting there smiling. And so finally it came my turn and I walked up to him and I didn't know what to say. So I said, I'm Scott Sparrow. And he smiled and nodded like, that's cool. But he waited. And then I said, Master, like I was going to ask him something. I said, Master. He said, he held up his finger. He said, who is Master? And I thought, he's telling me he's not my master. He's telling me that I should know that he's not my master. So I was a little thrown off by that, and I was puzzled. And then I kind of turned away, and a woman walked up, and a young woman, and said, here, let's start doing some yoga. So we started doing yoga together, and we were doing the cobra, side to side, face to face, kind of. And John, seeing the master, was watching, and the light came, boom. And I was in this ecstasy, and I could barely see. And I saw John seeing laughing, not laughing at me. He was joyous. He was just so happy that I was in this experience. So I came out of it. As you might imagine, there's a lot of implications. Who is Master? And I thought, well, maybe he's talking about Jesus. That was my initial assumption. He was saying, kind of like Jung said to many Westerners, follow your own tradition, find your teacher, find your guidance within your own religious tradition. You don't have to leave it. It's important for you to honor and actualize within your own culture. And so I thought, I did feel an affinity at that point to Jesus, literally. But also looking back on that, Jason, I think he was really saying, the dream was implying, it's everything. I mean, it's all the above. It's the woman. She walks in the room. Is she master? And then the light awakens. Is the light the master? Is Jesus the master? Of course. And so that dream has been a centerpiece of my life, where I realized that this was the initiation of the 6 chakras starting to happen. And in the East, the initiation of the 6 chakras, where they say, you must come face to face with your personal embodiment of God. Each soul cannot surpass this initiation. You've got to submit to some relationship where you serve and ask, whom does that? Who do I serve here? And so that experience began another search, which was, well, who is the best fit right now for me to devote myself to, so that I'm not out here by myself. And so it became Jesus for many years. He started showing up in dreams in the light. And so the light became him. But that wasn't a permanent or necessarily absolute experience. It was what I needed, okay? And what everybody needs is a personal journey and personal discovery. I think it's very necessary that we all have to do this thing. We can't go around it. We can't say, I don't want to do that. That's infantile. That's what they do in the East. They worship somebody. But in the East, they don't worship the guru. They worship what the guru represents within themselves. And that's what the initiation of the 6 chakra represents. It's finding God so that you can awaken fully to who you are, finding the embodiment that fits best.
We have a lot to unpack there, Scott.
Yeah, no, it's full.
All right, so let's begin with you're in Cobra pose, and we're talking about the activation of the 6th or 3rd eye chakra, typically associated with the pineal gland in this heart of the brain. When you look at depictions from Egypt, ancient Egypt, and others, you see these strange pictures where there's a cobra coming out of the person's forehead. Mm-hmm. And so you could say that it means that the person's Kundalini energy has been activated. Mm-hmm. If we go back to yoga tradition, the Kundalini energy is depicted as 2 snakes, typically cobras, that intertwine up the spine, and then they come out of the center of the forehead as a sort of 3rd eye. And so it's kind of a sign of enlightenment or awareness. And if you follow the the Kundalini teachings, it would tell you, it's saying that we all have this within ourselves, and we are all enlightened beings. If we go back to Edgar Cayce, and one of the things that he said that just is a revelation, that we are all part of co-creators with God. He puts us on a level as being in essence, a piece of the God that created the entire universe. And what we know as the universe is probably just, the surface of the bubble that's, there's who knows how much more there is than just this universe. And just comprehending that there is something that created all of this, what we know of in our universe is just beyond staggering. But I'd like to get back to that idea of what is it that you're finding within yourself when that you say that it gets represented as like some kind of form that comes to you. It could be a Christ figure, but it's also in the woman that you do the yoga with, because through this ritual that you two do, you are activating the light. So she's very much a part of it. You have a guru in the background, somebody that you'd gone to who you thought was going to be your teacher, and he's pointing you inward towards yourself as being the source. And I'd just like to say that what Jung said about this was that the Eastern way is a more of a collective way, and that the Western way towards individuation, what he said is that we all basically have to develop our own who we really are, that the path to enlightenment is essentially through developing yourself as a distinct being, the person that you are. So you are touching on, just in that one dream, a lot of different veins of thought. And I've gone off in several different directions. I'm hoping that maybe you can rescue us here and pull all this back together. Is there something that unifies all these ideas from your experience that would be helpful for listeners to understand their own experience?
Well, I know we want to talk a little bit about how to have this experience, if we can eventually, but in terms of developmentally, I think what happens when you find the connection with the appropriate master within or embodiment, and you talked about the need for us to have a symbol of the self, that it was important to have that kind of personal relationship. Okay.
Yeah.
So whether you think of it psychologically or actually, I think of it as kind of like in the East, that Jesus represents who I am, but I need to submit. So there's that paradox of needing to be in a relationship and serving that being, even though ultimately that being is who I am, right? But I'm not there yet, right? My ego can't handle that. So I have to be in a kind of receptive and service orientation. And what happens out of that relationship is then an agenda for one's life. And that's where he speaks, like in the first encounter I had with him after the dream was drawn, the guru, I dreamt of Jesus. Now he's in the light, right in the middle of the light. I would encounter him in a lucid dream. And he says, "Are you ready to leave the earth yet?" And I said, "No, of course not." Felt this tremendous love from the light, love from him. And then he said, "Then go out and do what you know to do. Go out and do what you know to do." Now that didn't have a list. It was up to me to determine what that meant. But I think what happened was I had the light with nobody, right? Kind of an empty room with all this ecstasy. And then I had the encounter with Sharon Singh where he said, "Who is master, not me," effectively. And then I saw Jesus, and he becomes the guy for me for a while. And he sets me on my mission in a very generic sense. You got to do your work. So that dream kept coming back. Am I doing what I need to do? I think about it all the time, even now, 50 years later. So that, I think, was part of the next kind of step in the journey toward, fullness. Is a service mission, if you will, the work.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you to clarify. So, because when you say the work, I'm having a Jungian background. What comes to mind for me is the work of becoming who you are, bringing forth individuation from deep within you. But I'm also thinking of the work that we have in the world where we are in service to others, where we can bring forward something unique about us that is of service to everyone else. And when you say the work, is this also what you're meaning?
Yeah. Well, the thing about the light experience is it's very bonding. The first feeling I had when I had that experience is love toward specific people. They just start appearing in my mind, if you will. And it reminds me of this book, All, that's just come out, where the author says that all has a communion or community based impulse. And when you feel all, when you see have the tears of a movie of people connecting, that's really about connection. That deep sense of awe is about connecting. And I think the experience of the light for me is really about service to connect with people, connecting them with others. And this building of bonds between people is a function of that light. So service isn't just about sacrifice, it's about intimacy, right? It's getting closer and bringing people closer.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of Alex Tanis, who was a famous psychic who demonstrated his abilities. He was also a professor at the University of Southern Maine, and he had a very popular dream interpretation course. There's a quote from him, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but it says, "The work that you do that is bringing forth what you do into the world is this," he doesn't even call it a labor of love. It's more like an expression of love. It's going to come from the deepest part of who you are. It gets put into the work that you do, and you see it go out into the world. And he equates this to sort of the divine mission that we each have, and that we can find within ourselves through finding the thing about ourselves that we want to bring to the world. Is there something that you think that you could tell the listeners from your experience? Look, I'm on Reddit, and I talk with a lot of younger people who are really trying to find their way in the world. They're not getting the guidance that they need. They are looking for something in themselves and in their lives that is going to give them a larger, more meaningful experience. And when they go and talk to counselors, peers, gurus, they often get answers that aren't very satisfying for them, because it'll be like, yes, follow the ways of transcendental meditation, or, do yoga, or, whatever it is. Like, I'm wondering, Scott, from your experience, what would you tell them is for them to find their work, the thing that's special, the light within them? What is it that they can do to find that and bring it into the world and embody it?
I think it's to follow what you really love, even though on the surface it might be a conventional object or a path. I mean, when Padmasambhava, the great founder of Tibetan Buddhism, he took Buddhism to Tibet. Anyway, he met a king there, and the king said, "Teach me to meditate." And Padmasambhava knew that the king loved jewels, collected fancy or beautiful jewels. And he said, "Meditate on your jewels." And so the king meditated on his jewels, and according to tradition, he achieved enlightenment and became one of the patriarchs because he followed what he loved, right? So I just really work with people, clients in therapy, students. What is it you love? Is it fly fishing? My son loves fly fishing. He's not a meditator yet, but he has a religious relationship to the bay and to nature. So, I think it can be through a variety of forms that we find depth. Depth is really what it's about. It's not form. It's what takes you deep.
So this thing is something that if a person is trying to answer this question, it sounds to me like the way to find the answer would be, what is it that you love to do? What is it that calls to you? It could be like your son's case, fly fishing or something related. I know people who found themselves, they go deep into nature, and they just simply, it's not like they're going out there to, meditate under the grandest redwood in the forest. Right. They might do those things, but mostly it's just having an experience of life in nature. They find something within themselves that brings something forward in them. Our friend my co-host Steve Ernenwein is found his way through music. Music led him beautiful. Deep. Yeah, beautiful.
And you could feel it in his work. It's just anointed, literally.
So, and it's bringing forth something that is him, that is an expression of who he is. It's in his music. And it's most easy for others to see in something that's like a creative work. But Scott, can you name some other examples that you can think of that would be the kinds of things that you've seen people find the path to true, authentic self through something that they do? Or
I think it really can be anything if you feel called to it. And I think calling is really what it's about. This deep, almost like born with this agenda, right, to unfold in your life like an oak tree, to become an oak tree, whatever that means to. But if you don't mind, I'd like to go back and just mention that there is a way to have that initial fundamental anointing more readily available to people as they are doing the work, but they may want to do the practice, the kind of fundamental practice that will activate more of that Kundalini light experience, so that the work they do may be more imbued with radiance and that kind of feeling of specialness. So I feel that there is a way to go to get there if people are willing to do the work. And so, do you want me to talk about that?
Oh, my friends, this is what I've been waiting for.
Well, it's kind of paradoxical because it's hard to do the work for something you haven't directly experienced. It's just hard to ask for somebody to get up in the middle of the night and to meditate for half an hour for something they've never experienced. But Edgar Cayce said this about middle of the night meditation, which is what I'm going to make the centerpiece. He said, if you're willing to do this, to get up and pray and meditate for an hour every night for 28 days on lunar cycle. I've done it twice. It is an ordeal, right? But if you're willing to do it, he said, you will know a peace you've never known. And it's true. It is almost inevitably true that will happen if you're willing to do it. So if you're willing to do that kind of practice in the middle of the night, your dreams are going to be imbued with amazing essence, from the impact of that practice at 2 to 3 a.m. From 3 to 6, your dreams are going to be unprecedented, most likely. And over time, maybe not immediately because everybody has a different capability, but over time, you're going to see luminosity. You're going to feel it. And that's going to be this kind of foundational, what they call Shaktipat, the awakening of the Kundalini, where it becomes light in your dreams or in your waking. So that to me is the biggest practice for me. All my life I've spoken about it. Do this and you'll be surprised.
I was able to do it like 2 nights in a row after I first met. I read Cayce's, what he said about it, and also a follow-up from John Van Alken at the Edgar Cayce Foundation. It's, by the way, for listeners, the Association for Research and Enlightenment is the organization that Cayce founded and left behind after he passed many decades ago. And they have continued bringing forth Cayce's teachings and to have other people who've practiced the things that Cayce taught and recommended, such as the meditation in the middle of the night, and have had the experiences that he says is part of this path, that if you decide that you want to be on it, that you will have these experiences of visitation, extraordinary dreams, the awakening of the chakras in a deeper sort of level, a very physical experience of feeling the energy work through you. I am intuitive dominant, which in the four functions of the mind, according to Carl Jung, he says that the inferior function, the one that is used least, is also the path to your soul. Mm-hmm. And so for me, feeling the energy as it works through my body through practices like Qigong and through chakra activation meditations and through toning, basically chanting to activate or harmonize, energize the chakras has been my path I've been finding to it. But I also found that getting up in the middle of the night to meditate was very difficult to do for any period of time.
Well, if you can just meditate a lot, just meditate during the day, that helps. That will probably be sufficient. There was a time in my life twice for several years I meditated 2 hours a day. So it had a tremendous impact without regards to whether I got up in the middle of the night. So I don't think you have to do that. But if you kind of want a maximum impact, you may want to try that for a month or so and see what happens.
So a lunar cycle, would we begin on a new moon or a full moon, or is there
I don't know about that. I just have done it twice with a group of people. It's very hard to do it by yourself because you need some accountability, right? Like when you get up into like, you don't want to do this. I do not want to do this, right?
The body can be naturally trained to wake up. We talked about the biphasic. You will go through about a 4 or 4.5 hours of sleep, and your body has gotten the rest that it needs. So if you can wake up naturally, which I found I can do, I don't have to set an alarm. I can wake up naturally because I've gotten in the habit of it. And then that becomes easier to do rather than trying to wake up to an alarm.
Good point.
And then go and meditate because you're going to have those sleep hormones still working on you. If you Is that what you do, Scott? Do you wake up naturally, or is this something where you set an alarm to wake you up?
No, I usually get up around 4 or 4:30. And sometimes I'll meditate, sometimes I don't. I'm lazy. Like it's hard still. But if you do that, the impact of meditation is going to carry right over into the dream. You're not going to have your hours of, like you say, non-dream sleep. You're going to have a maximum carryover. Also, what you might find is you go back to sleep slowly, you may hear energy, you may feel energy, and that's the beginning of the Kundalini stirring. So if you can just not go to sleep immediately, but just kind of gently go in, you may be able to hear this intimation of the Kundalini stirring. And you can meditate on that. If you can become aware of it before you go all the way to sleep, then it's a maximum moment opportunity.
Are we talking about a voice?
No, it's like a valve opening and closing, kind of a hissing sound. And people have associated it with a pre-out-of-body sound. It's classic. Robert Monroe, who wrote Journeys Out of the Body, said he had to have that sound before he could leave. And what I found is when you hear that, a lot of people report it. It's kind of opening and closing like that. And when you hear that, you usually can just roll right out of your body. But what I encourage people to do is meditate on that sound. And what happens is the full awakening of the Kundalini can then follow, and then the light can come. So that's kind of the whole package. If you can marry meditation with your middle of the night, and then feel or listen for that phenomenon and meditate on it, you can really have a grand awakening.
How did this happen for you before you had started these practices? You said you just started meditating and then you had this experience.
Spontaneously. Yeah. Just, this is all by luck or gift. But I think, I don't think I'm unique. I just think that I happen to have a hunger at the time and a willingness to do things that most people don't do, which is to meditate a whole lot and to do it in the middle of the night as well. And I lucked out and discovered, gold.
When did you start the middle of the night meditation practice?
1971. In the same year I had the first light experience. I met my best friend, Mark Thurston, and we started meditating in the middle of the night. When we lived together, we could get up and, side
you
by
were
side.
Roommates?
Our single beds, yeah.
Oh,
five different places, yeah. Anyway, we would practice and have those experiences.
So I think that we could also perhaps recommend that if you can find a partner Or it could be a group, but just having a partner who you can do these practices with, that might be helpful for. Okay. Is there anything related to diet that you found is helpful? Cayce talks about the alkalinity of the body being important for health overall. But is there anything that you found that diet impacts this process?
Well, kind of no-brainer things like no alcohol before that night, light food, like in the Tibetan texts, they talk about light food and exercise to deepen or stabilize the sleep. So I think it's just really normal hygiene, and then the meditation and yoga or practice on top of that.
Okay, so avoid the late night run to Taco Bell before because if you have that heavy food in you as you're trying to sleep, it's going to affect your dreaming. It seems like if you wanted to summarize what we've been talking about so far as it being sort of a process of, well, some people call it awakening, but it seems like it's a process of awareness. And you're talking, meditation makes you more aware, just in the sense that you're centered within your own mind and body in a way that just makes you more aware of things. Everything seems to slow down a little bit. But I also mean awareness in the sense of there is an awareness behind the dream. There's an awareness of you coming from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a word for what that awareness is that is behind the scenes, both in dreams, and it also seems to be behind the curtain of what we call material reality? There's something there that's aware of us. What do you call it?
Yeah, well, I'm not a theistic thinker, so I try to avoid words like God and things that are going to be objectifying that presence. So I see it as our nature, higher consciousness. So words fail me, but I really try to avoid objectification and a theistic approach. I'm much more of a Buddhist by nature, even though Jesus was my guru, has been very important to me. But I think of it more psychologically, that we're sleeping, we're unaware, and that the whole process is to become awake to who we are, to our true natures. So maybe true nature might be a good description of what I'm describing or what I think is behind the curtain.
So even though we're awake and running around in this physical world in our bodies, we're actually asleep until something deeper wakes us up. Okay.
Yeah. Don't you think?
Yes, I do. I love the Matrix analogy. Neo is caught up in this world where he's a busy bee, a worker bee in this corporation. And, the phone gets delivered to him, and Morpheus, the Roman god of dreams, Morpheus, the character, then decides that they're going to attempt to wake him up, and he finds that there is a reality that is different than the one that he's acclimated to, that he's accustomed to, the everyday waking reality that we all participate in it. And look at what he does. His first reaction is, I want nothing to do with this. He wants to go back to sleep, which is also a theme that runs with some of the characters, such as Cypher, so short for Lucifer. Which
I can relate to that.
The desire resistance to kind of go back to sleep and the resistance. How did you work with that resistance in yourself? Because I know that there's going to be people I know that I've been in that place. You say you've been in that place. It's a common feature. There are very few of us who get invited to go deeper and we just go, sure, yeah, let's do it. And, there's no resistance to it. So what is that resistance like for you, and how did you work with it?
Well, I'm glad that I think it was Jung who said that the process of individuation is in part autonomous, so that if we do resist, we try to hide out, it'll come get us. The self will come get us. The messenger will come. Like I had dreams of hiding from God, literally in the dream. I knew that he was looking for me and would try to strike me with lightning. And so in the dreams, I would lie down in a ditch trying to avoid, the bolt of lightning. So I had to laugh at those dreams and realize that I really was still holding out. So meditation helps resistance. It just helps break down the fear. So I think that it's hard to directly address it, but if we practice letting go, it's really all about surrender. The light is really about surrender. It's not about dying like they think. The near-death experience is also characterized by the light experience, right? So people think that we have to die to have this experience. It's not that at all. We have to let go. So the experience is immediately available if we can radically surrender. But who can, right? You can't flip a switch and make that letting go happen. But we can practice meditation so that in the meditation, perhaps we can slide into home base in spite of our resistance.
I'm reminded of what Jesus said to you in that dream. He said, "Are you ready to go?" And you said, "No." Do you think maybe how literal was that question? Are you ready to go? Like you could have rolled right out of your body and never come back. And next thing we know, we're at Scott's funeral. But was it more figurative?
I think it was kind of literal. It was kind of a threat or a warning that if I didn't choose my journey, embrace it, that my life might be shortened by that lack of involvement. I've always been on the fence kind of person, quick to walk away, which is kind of the downside of letting go, right, is cutting off. So most of us who are mystics, I think by nature, we're also cut off people. And the higher power hates that, doesn't think that's going to work, for us.
So the things that keep most people anchored into life, if that's not keeping you here, then it's very easy to just sort of let go and drift off into the much bigger universe.
Oh, yeah. I've always had that tendency. So having children, for me, having a son, having fly fishing and wading in the warm water of the Laguna Madre, being grounded, like you said earlier, is really important for us to also have our head in the clouds and have that capacity to bring down the light from above.
Which you do in that first dream when you call down the lightning. You're bringing down the light from above. You're doing it a little bit, the Mickey Mouse out of control in the Fantasia when he first learns his powers and they start going haywire. In an odd sort of way, you could say that there was almost like a foretelling in that dream that you're bringing down the thing from above and making it very much part of the grounded reality that's down here for all of us. This is the path. If people want to follow it, it's involving their dreams, and their dreams will take them into some place that seems to go deeper. It'll open up to something. Another layer of reality can be directly experienced. Is there anything else that you would recommend to listeners if they want to go on this path?
To be in community, to have people, like you said, accountability partners, or be in a group, so that when you do that kind of practice, you're not by yourself. Because if you do stir these energies to life, they can be destabilizing. Kind of by nature they are. They're going to break up old patterns and throw you off your normal course of action, because they're restructuring you. And that's scary to the ego. So in the Eastern, they say, if you're going to do this kind of accelerated path, they called it, which is highly energetic, then you need to have somebody, a master or somebody, a teacher, working with you to kind of hold you in place and not allow you to feel afraid or get off the path. So I don't think it has to be, terrifying or ominous, but nonetheless, we need to be respectful of what we're stirring to life.
Is this part of what you will hope to accomplish with Dreamstar? Dreamstar Institute, of which I'm a member and Scott is the founder, is a certification and training program in dream work, dream interpretation and analysis. But I would also say that what I'm seeing from my participation so far is that Dreamstar is a community of people who are interested, first of all, in dream work, but we know where dream work leads for a lot of us. Ryan Hurd is another one that I've seen around participating in the message forums. And, Ryan has had similar experiences of finding out what's behind the curtain and engaging with it through his dream life and his spiritual life. He's also, by the way, we've already recorded the interview. Ryan is a future guest on this show.
Oh, good.
So we get to look forward to that. But is that, because I want to mention Dreamstar, because it is a community that you've been creating. And is that part of the reason or part of what the purpose is behind it? To have a community for people to anchor into for these experiences. Okay.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Not just dream analysis, which is really a big part of our work, but also dream yoga, getting in touch with the spirit of your deeper self through dreaming, as you and I have both found to be our path of action, path of practice, right? So that Dreamstar is kind of opening that up, hopes to invite people into that practice.
Dreamstar.community, I think, was the URL that I got when I got my invite. Okay.
Right. The community is a separate platform, and Dreamstar Institute is a link to it back and forth. So you can go to either one, dreamstarinstitute.com or Dreamstar Community for a kid, Dreamstar.community. But you can go either way and find the resources in both.
So there's going to be resources for people who are interested in dream work, but also we know that dream work often leads to this sort of deeper practice of engaging with the same awareness that's behind the dream, that intelligent awareness that is autonomous of us, is also something that people encounter in other practices, spiritual practices and such. They encounter something, the light, and it seems like it's their paths to the same place, and that it's the same thing that's behind the scenes. The thing that's behind the scenes of the dreams that's engaging with us is also the thing that engages with us in our spiritual practices and eventually reveals itself to us if we're ready to receive it. Would you say that's true, Scott?
Yes, very much.
This was what I was, when we first set out on this interview, and I saw the dreams that you shared with me that you wanted to talk about today. I saw an opportunity to discuss something that hasn't come up as much on the show, but we have circled around it. That there is something, an intelligent source, awe-inspiring intelligent source that is behind the dreams. It may not be every dream that you have is going to be this sort of profound thing that is engaging with you to lift the veils off of your eyes and understand reality in a deeper sort of way and understand yourself. But that does seem to be, even with these sort of ordinary dreams, like dreams that are obviously processing events and memories of the day, that are speaking to decisions that are currently going on in your life. Even with those dreams, just the entire process, the reason why we dream. This is big, Scott, because we've had these debates, and in the IASD that there's a lot of academics have weighed in, and some of them say that there are the threat rehearsal theory of dreaming and developed in human species, because dreaming gives us a chance to rehearse things that might be threats in our life. They use the kind of like, the caveman encountering the saber-toothed tiger. And because it's dreamed about an encounter with a dangerous animal, it's had a chance to rehearse the situation in a safe place. So dreaming developed in the human species as a way of enhancing survival, which evolutionary biologists love that explanation. And then you've got a lot of other theories out there for why we dream. In light of the conversation that we've had, Scott, why do we dream? What's your opinion on why dreaming developed in human beings?
I think it's to initiate us into what we haven't incorporated or integrated. Now, it may be threat, it may be things, it may be intimacy, it may be things that we haven't been able to accept. So the dream brings us as an agenda for us to be whole. But what keeps us from being whole is we're unwilling or unconscious of what we need to embrace, accommodate, and understand about ourselves. So every dream is to some extent an initiation. Here, this is what you're not conscious of. This is not what you're willing to entertain yet about yourself. So every dream is a little edgy. It's a little dissonant because the agenda is integration. Can you do something? Can you respond in a new way? Can you become aware that this is a part of you? So to me, yes, all of that threat, social development of relationships, spiritual initiation, all of that fits within this overarching paradigm that the dream is about offering you up whatever you need in the moment to become more complete. Whatever is up first, it's like a line of tests, if you will. So that's the way I see it, as an initiation. And the key to my whole approach, as you probably know, is what is your response to the dream? What did you do? What did you do? What could you have done differently to allow for that integrated process?
I want to drop a term for listeners. Co-creative dream theory is, Scott came up with this with Mark Thurston, his friend and companion in the spiritual path. And in co-creative dream theory, the dream is not predetermined. It is, I like to use the example, the analogy, it's a choose your own adventure, because I'm very much into the story side of dreaming and analyzing dreams as a participatory story. Co-creative dream theory says that the unconscious is presenting something to you that is unintegrated, or it needs to be better understood by the ego. So it brings up the content, and the dream imagery itself is a sort of secondary process in the sense that it is produced through the interaction of the ego with the unconscious. So I would like to give an opportunity here. Co-creative dream theory is your baby. Scott Sparrow is associated with this theory because you brought forward a major theory that it seems to encompass a lot of what dreaming is. So would you like to present your theory to our listeners?
Well, you just did a great job. I'm really happy. You did as good a job as I've ever been to do. No, you did great.
What would you add, if anything?
Well, I have a rather simple view of things at times, sometimes simplistic, but I think I want to pare it down to the most important elements. And I think if people could remember that co-creative dream theory is about you, about what you do in the dream, about your assumptions, your beliefs, your attitudes, that what you bring into the dream is coalescing with the unconscious content to produce the imagery. So you're a co-author. And if you can take responsibility for what you're bringing into the dream and take that same attitude toward life, then you're an agent, right? You're like the change you want to see in the world. Like Gandhi said, instead of seeing yourself as just, oh, I had a dream, you would see yourself as, oh, I dreamt this, and this is what came of it. And next time, I want to do better. Or I want to do more of what I did. But I'm focused on me rather than it. And focused on what I can do rather than what's happening to me. I think that's a high bar for life in general.
Which it does seem to be another thing that we can pull out of dreaming, and what it does for us is that it's showing us ways in our lives that we respond unconsciously or habitually to situations, and provides us with opportunities to break patterns. In some of your teachings, I've seen examples. Let's just start with a simple one. There's a recurring monster in your dream. And every time you see the monster, you cower in fear, you run away, you try pulling out a howitzer and blasting it. Of course, it's a dream figure, so that stuff is probably not going to work. This is a habitual response.
Yeah.
You can take that and analyze it using your method, the 5-star method of dream work, really looking for the places where there were decision points in the dream narrative that you can look at and go, well, why did I react that way? And what could be the alternative? Stephen, I believe, if I remember right, my co-host Stephen had a scary figure in his dream that he decided he was going to hug it. This was a different response than usual. He embraces it with love, and it transformed.
Yeah, always remarkable.
He's going to come in and tell that story during his commentary.
Yes, thank you, Jason. I'm pretty sure he's thinking of a different dream, but I do have another dream that actually ties into what he was speaking to, but also is a dream that actually involves the light. So this was a lucid dream that I had. It was probably back in 2010, where before I became lucid, I was in this kitchen, and I think I was doing something horribly inappropriate, like masturbating. But I think it was jarring enough to where I questioned what I was doing, just like openly in a kitchen that I didn't even know whose kitchen it was. And it spurred me into lucidity, because I'm like, what am I doing? And I'm looking around this kitchen, and I find this note that says, things that I know that I don't know that I know. And it had a whole slew of things on this piece of paper, and some of them looked like scientific kind of equations and stuff like that. It was all like too much for me to even be able to process, so fortunately I didn't actually retain any of that. It was just really kind of neat to see that. But before I could even get into that, this little girl enters behind me, and she gets my attention. I turn around and I look at her and I go, oh, hello. And she goes, hey, so what is it that you thought you might want to do in your next lucid dream? And I'm like, whoa, okay. And I said, well, actually, I've been really wanting to face some fears. And she lights up, gets all excited, and she takes my hand, and she's like, come with me. And we walk out of the house, and she walks me into the middle of this street, and she literally walks me right into the middle of the street. She lets go of my hand, and she walks over to the side of the road. And as soon as she gets over the side of the road, this man that was sitting on the curb stands up, and he starts walking at me quite aggressively. He's a priest, and he's just walking, fuming in circles around me. And he's damning me, and he's telling me I'm basically worthless, and that I'm a sinner, and that he's just basically berating me in the most incredible way. I was just like, wow, okay, this is where we're going. And for some reason, I don't get pinched. I don't react. And I just feel kind of bad for the guy. And before I can get upset, I coach myself and be like, this might be a test. How are you going to respond to this? And so instead of engaging with him, I just focus on him, and I send him the most pure love from my heart that I can muster, even in the face of him berating me and saying some real choice words that in any other circumstance would have probably gotten under my skin in about no time flat. Really wish I could remember at least one of the phrases, because my God, it was so crazy. But anyways, in that moment, when the love hits him, he changes immediately. And it's like I pass the test, and the man thrusts his arm up in the air and he goes, give this man some light. And all of a sudden, you gotta imagine this, I'm in the middle of a street, like just staring down a huge one-way street, and the clouds in the sky all part, and this brilliant, unexplainable light just rockets out of the sky, and it just hits me. And as soon as it does, and I'm completely overwhelmed, by the love that is felt in there. All of these shadow-like figures, one by one, come walking down the street. They join me in the light, and I hug them, and they just evaporate. And then the next one comes in, and I hug it, and it evaporates. And the next one comes in, and I hug it, and it evaporates. And eventually I wake up. And like so many lucid dreams that I've had where I've attempted to embrace nightmarish characters, woke up feeling viscerally lighter and just filled and imbued with this feeling of being touched by God, of feeling like something got righted in my soul. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that you can ever hope to experience in a lucid dream. I know a lot of people like the flying, they like doing a lot of the fanciful things, but I'm telling you, this kind of experience, like you've heard from Scott so far this whole time, it really leaves a mark on you in a way that you never quite forget. This dream was a long time ago, like a lot of his were, and I think you could just heard it in my voice when I just told it. It's still right there. It really, truly is. And so unprompted by me in the lucid dream too, which is, you know, one of the more beautiful things about it for me is that, like, I didn't even go looking for that. It came to me. It met me. It saw something in me that I wanted. Like, it was true that I was wanting to face some fears in the lucid dream, and it was like, it came looking for me. It met me halfway. And that to me is so deeply special, you know? So, there you go. Thanks, Jay.
There are ways that you can change your responses in dreams to things that come up habitually. And Scott, what does that do for the person in their waking life?
Well, I think it transforms the relationships that are defined around that nugget of resistance that they've been having maybe for all their life. These moments where we respond differently, like Stephen did, can be life-changing, even though it's momentary in a dream. It's so pivotal that we can truly change the course of our life by focusing on, okay, what can I do next time? Or what did I do that was unfortunate? But most people, let's face it, they come to me and they say, what is a monster? You know, they want to know what it means.
Yes.
And I want to focus on what they did with the monster. I don't know what the monster is. It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't matter, because your response can transform that monster. Let's talk about what you need to do rather than what it means. So that's the whole division, if you will, between content orientation and dreamer response orientation.
And this is what I really want to emphasize. There's a lot of people who know me as a teacher of dream interpretation. And I started off in the traditional schools of interpretation and analysis, and which wants us to define what those symbols mean. And, you know, I could look at the monster in the dream, and it is. You can say, well, that monster is if it's a fear. But here's the thing. It's right there in front of you, because how do you respond to the monster? If you respond to it as something that is fearful, fear-inspiring in you, then you have a very simple definition for what the monster is. You are interacting with something that is the image of a fear for you. So now you're interacting with the fear, and you can understand that, and we can move on. Now we can do something with the information. And I think this is very important, where dream work with someone such as someone who's certified through your 5-star method, the facilitator is what you call the dream worker in your method, is going to take you to that moment in the dream where you interacted with the monster that is a symbol for fear. And they're going to say, how can we change the narrative here? What would you like to do to respond differently to this? So now we can start programming you to interact differently with your fear. It might help you the next time you dream about the monster or some other symbol for that fear. But right now, while we are awake, person to person interacting in a session, you can start changing this response pattern, perhaps even rewiring your brain
just in the fantasy, just in the imagination, starts to alter the whole relationship, right? Just by us raising the question. So we're starting to enact change, even as we talk about what could happen. What would you want to do differently? So, yeah. And also going back to the original premise of the light, when you do that transformational response in a dream, when you're able to do this rather than that, quite often the form of the image goes away or transforms into something luminous. We know that the energy behind the monster is holy. It's like it, but it's all kind of distorted and wrapped up in this fear. And so when we're able to respond in a new way, sometimes we go right all the way to the experience of life. One time I had a woman, for instance, she was in the dream and she was angry at me. And she came up to me and I was trying to kind of fend off her blows. And I blocked her attempt to hit me. And I reached out and I just kind of held her gently. And I said, you are the feeling, the intuitive, I am the rational, typical kind of, I'm the rational. But together we serve the same Father. Boom, the light came, just like that. In a dream that normally you would think would be like a kind of a crappy dream, right?
But let's unpack that a little bit. You, as the rational, meaning that you're representing the male side of the energy. Think of it as more of in terms of yin and yang. They are two types of energy. Feminine is more intuitive, non-rational. And according to the Kundalini, these two come together within the individual. There's they're essentially masculine and feminine, the two snakes intertwine going up the spine. These are two energy channels, and one is by nature masculine, meaning masculine energy. It's what you referred to as rational. The other is feminine natured, and you referred to that as intuitive, but it took form in your dream as a woman who you were in conflict with, and you could basically break that down as there was a conflict in you between the rational and the intuitive sides of you.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And by embracing it in the dream, you were actually able to unify these two energies together, and you found out that what was behind it was something that was luminous. Scott, are you saying that the light is behind all of the dream imagery? I mean, if you interact with it in the right way, you're going to get it to reveal what it really is?
Yes, and that's right out of, by the way, not just my experience, but an idea that comes out of the Tibetan yoga, where they say that behind the form of the dream is the Dharmakaya, the white light, the holy source, and that the form of the dream is basically our illusion, right? Our karma, our unresolved relationships that we have to make transparent. How do we do that? I think it's by meditating and responding in a new way in the encounter. And then the light reveals itself.
So dreaming is the path to enlightenment.
Right.
We'd like to make these distinctions between different types of dreams and what they're for and what they do. But what you're saying is, in the tradition and what you've discovered through your own experience and also through the study of dream yoga, is that the light is behind everything in the dream, and every dream is for the purpose of enlightenment.
Yeah, one of my mentors said one time, he said, when we dream, we either see God or we see what we have put between us and God. So it's always there, right? I mean, that's really straight out of Mahayana Buddhism, the tantric yoga. Is the light is always there, and we have to practice seeing through the veil, the illusion of our own karmic creation, our fear responses. Let me tell you one short dream of another person that really, I think, captures this whole thing. He suddenly finds himself alone in an old cabin, and the door opens and three people come in: Frankenstein, werewolf, and Dracula. standing side by side, and he's afraid. He becomes aware he's dreaming. It shocks him so much he becomes lucid. How is this even possible, right? So he says, "Oh, is this my dream? Go away." So they go away. He's all by himself now. He's thinking, well, maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. Maybe I should have him come back, and I'll surround myself with light. So he said, "Will you come back?" So they came back in the room, boom, 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 facing him. So he said, "I surround myself with light." And boom, there's light around him, swirling, and he couldn't hardly see them. And then he thought, well, maybe that's not the best thing to do. Maybe I should invite them into the light. So he said, "Will you please come into the light?" And they walked forward, and as they did, he moved into this ecstatic illumination experience, and then came out of the experience. He said he was in it for 3 days. He just felt this love and ecstasy for 3 days. So you can see what happens when we remove the veil, right, by responding in a loving way toward the adversary, the monsters. The light's right there, right? It's right behind him.
And it was there all the time.
Yeah,
the dream,
all the time. Mm-hmm.
And the dream is showing you what is the obstacles to you knowing that in a very personal sort of way. Mm-hmm. And back to Carl Jung, he said that dreams are invariably trying to show the ego what it does not know or understand. And I also like to say that it's also trying to show us what we don't want to know. Jung would have said that this is a path to psychological wholeness. What's the next thing that happens after you've achieved psychological wholeness? Is now you have a more direct engagement with whatever it is that's creating life itself. So soul, God. Mm-hmm. You've had these encounters. You've had dreams with Jesus and other holy figures like Mary in your dreams. Mm-hmm. And we were going to talk about the nature of those things, but it seems to me, Scott, that these are questions that circle around an answer and are kind of superficial in a way.
Mm-hmm.
What is
reductionistic?
Really yeah,
reductionistic. They want to reduce it so we can understand it, and in reducing it, we may lose dimensionality. So we have to be careful not to use language that's convenient, just to kind of have a satisfied feeling about it.
I would like to talk about the woman. You said there was a dream that you had. If you don't mind, I'm going to read it.
Sure.
You're with an unknown woman. Both of us are afflicted with an incurable fatal disease. That night, we went to sleep in separate beds, only a few feet apart. In the middle of the night, I was overcome by a brilliant white light. I surrendered to it fully as I could, aware that the resistance I've often felt during such encounters seemed, at least, non-existent. I was also conscious that the light was passing through me into the woman. As the light came in pulsating waves of ecstasy, I heard a man's voice say, "Your mortal life is over." When I awakened in the morning, both the woman and I had been healed of our illness, and I knew that we would remain together for all of eternity. It seems like a good time to bring that up because we're talking about the process that's happening as you engage with what's behind the dream, and it leads you into a transformative journey. When you had that dream, where were you on that path of transformation?
It was a while back. It was probably 20 years ago. I was a hot mess, which is not unusual. Going through a lot of life changes, divorce and loss, but these dreams are meant to be, I think, healing and restorative, not a celebration or a merit badge, but really, truly healing brokenness. So I think this dream was good news, really good news, but also, of course, pointing to really a brokenness that needed to be addressed. I think to hear that your mortal life is over, it sounds like it's kind of the ego would shake at that, right, and tremble. But I think on a deeper level, it really had to do with your fear is done. You're living in a kind of state of imperfection or fragility is over. That you've let go. That this is a moment of surrender. And so I thought it was a real kind of a coming home dream, even though it's not a permanent moment. It's just in that moment, everything came together in a surrender experience.
So both you and the woman are ill. I mean, you have a incurable, fatal disease
called life, right?
I was going to ask if there was a way you could define what that is. It's not to say that life is a disease, but that what does it mean by, like, what's fatal about it? What's incurable about it? Will you expand on that?
Yeah. We were divided. Think of it. We're in separate beds. We're separate people. And in a way, that division is what we're afflicted with, being in the world, right? We can't resolve that independence and isolation. So I think that it is the one condition that explains our fear and our frailty. We're not whole. We were divided within, we were divided between ourselves and others. So I think the mortal life has to do with that, being divided, being incomplete.
I'm looking at the description here. The light comes in pulsating waves. Your mortal life is over. You've both been healed of your illness, and you'll remain together for all eternity. When I first read that, what reminded me of what some people call the soul is this part of oneself that is born into the world with us. And we can spend our lives looking for it again, because somewhere deep inside us, you referred to at one point that you felt like you were home in the dream when you were in the light. The light was home. And that struck me because I've also had this sense that there is a home that we leave when we're born into the body and experience life, because we're separate from the place where we came from, where we are in a constant state of feeling unified and connected with the thing that created us, the sort of our spiritual origins. So when you say that you would remain together for all eternity, is it speaking to your relationship with home? Like, what I'm picturing is that you had figured out how to remain connected to home in your waking life at all times. But that's just what I picture. What did it mean for you?
Well, I wish that were true. I think things happen in dreams like that are consummating kind of complete experiences, but they're not a picture of how things map out in real life, So that was true. That moment of unity was true and kind of inviolate and always there to return to. But of course, then the next day, I have to go to work. Everything kind of unpacks again and becomes imperfect and stressful. So I don't see it as a perfect moment. I mean, perfect moment, yes, but not perfectly stable and permanent. And I think this is where we really fall, is assuming that enlightenment is a perfect or a permanent state.
Yes.
This is where we fail, by assuming that enlightenment is a permanent state. This is a Western notion, I think. In Buddhism, they talk about enlightenment as a moment-to-moment choice to be at your best and to embrace the highest, right? So it's never fixed. It's always fluid. And so this moment in my dream was, yes, one of these incredible moments, celebrations, probably the greater reality, the greater truth in my life. But, the next day I have to chop wood. Go back to
chop wood and carry water. Yes. Before enlightenment, what did you do? I chopped wood and carried water.
Yeah. Right.
After enlightenment, what did I do? I chopped wood and carried water. Yes.
Yeah.
And perhaps what I found with a lot of these sort of numinous dreams is that what they are sort of harbingers. They're pointing towards where we are going in our development. It's not saying that we're necessarily already there, but it gives us a glimpse of what can be our future. I mean, to be able to live in eternity with connection with something that you went through a transformative healing experience with. And since you're male, the soul side of you often will take form in your dreams as a female figure. I have a sense that perhaps this dream was speaking to something deeper than that.
Well, I think it's beyond words, even though all of those constructs are useful and true.
Bob was one of the original teachers of what we call astral projection. But I think that there's perhaps a term, there's something with the terminology that is fundamentally wrong, because I don't think that you're actually leaving your body.
Well, I think we tend to use physicalistic terms, time and space terms, to try to capture what's going on. Back in 76, I wrote in Lucid Dreaming, Dawning of the Clear Light, that I don't think we're going anywhere. It's that we're already there. It's almost like Jonathan Livingston Seagull's guru, remember, he said, perfect speed is realizing that you're already there. So we're really not going anywhere, but we're actually transcending localized identity, the attachment to the body as only basis for our identity. When we transcend that, then we're everywhere. We can choose to be focusing on the body, tuning into the body, or we can choose to be down the road. So I see it that way. It's not a matter of moving anywhere. It's a matter of overcoming locality.
It seems to be that the dreaming, by putting us into different perspectives, dreaming sometimes out of other eyes, seeing from other perspectives, is actually teaching us this fundamental nature of what our universe really is and how our mind interfaces with it. Is there anything more you want to add to that, Mr. Sparrow?
No. That's beautiful.
I know we've been going for a while, and you had another dream that you shared. Do you want to talk about that one? It's a beautiful dream. Do you want me to read it? Because it involves Mary and Mary Magdalene.
Be a way for us to kind of wrap things up. That would be
okay.
I think this dream really captures so much of what we talked about, but go ahead.
All right. So Scott writes, I became aware that a group of hunters, of which my stepfather and father were members, had come upon a Native American man in the woods. Thinking of the man as no more than an animal, they had killed him and beheaded him, keeping his head as a trophy. I was horrified and convinced that the crime had to be reported. While most of the hunters expressed no remorse whatsoever, my father wore a pained, confused look about what they had done. As I talked to him about our need to take action, it was as if he slowly awakened from a deep sleep and finally acknowledged the truth, that I called the authorities and told them what had happened. As I hung up, I became aware that a cougar was making its way up into deep South Texas, passing through the King Ranch, skirting the U.S. Border Patrol checkpoint at the little town of Sarita, and moving into the area near the Mexican border where I'd grown up. I was hopeful that it would thrive there. Then suddenly I was aware that I was dreaming. I walked south through a meadow and looked up to see a beautiful, dew-covered red hibiscus hanging over my head. I took a few more steps and affirmed that when I looked up the next time, I would see the holy light. I lifted my eyes and beheld a huge orb of white light surrounded by a delicate lattice-like corona that took up most of the sky. I knew that it was the light of Christ. Then an elderly woman approached from behind me. Her eyes told me that she loved me. I reached out, put my arm around her, and kissed her forehead, knowing that she was Mary, the mother of Jesus. We turned back toward the light and saw that a second light had appeared to the left, slightly below the white orb. The new light was bluish violet and, with delicate hair-like filaments of light, resembled the blossom of a passion flower. I turned to Mary and said, "Is that your light?" She nodded. I turned back and looked again, only to see that a third light had joined the other two. It appeared to the right, slightly below the white orb. It shone from the window of a tower whose base now stood only a few feet away from us. Whose light is that? I asked. Mary replied, it's Mary Magdalene's light. Then I said, do you want to go there? Again, she nodded. And so we walked forward and began to climb the tower's circular stairs together. Then I awakened. So,
yeah, that was a big one.
Where do we begin? Scott, tell us what that dream means to you.
Well, I know there's a lot there, and it's hard for the dreamer themselves to interpret or analyze a dream. But I think the first part had to do with my own becoming aware of my own history of insensitivity to my own my own primitive side, my own emotional nature, and other people. This brutishness, that Percival had to become aware of in the story of how he had abused and misused people. And so this awakening, this horror, is, I think, the beginning of wholeness for a lot of men when we realize we've got to realize what we've done. Be remorseful, become accountable to our own aggression and, accountable to our better natures. So that, I think, was the first part. And then the second part, then being able to see the light was, of course, predicated on being able to be accountable and heal the darker drives and impulses of my nature. Right?
Right. So that's when the hunters, your father realizes what he's done, and you want to call the authorities and tell them what happened. And this is a response point in the dream where you are saying that you want to take responsibility for that part of your nature that is like the group of hunters that killed the native man, and kept his head as a trophy.
Yeah.
When you make that decision, this is very important. When I look for decision points in dreams and how the dream responds to us, because not only are we responding to the dream then uses our decisions to decide what happens next. When you get off the phone and you've reported this crime, that's when you see the cougar. Like in your mind's eye, this thing is moving up into deep South Texas. Now, this is where you grew up. And you still live in that McAllen area, right? The Rio Grande Valley and all that. So the cougar is now moving up into the area that is your home roots there. And it manages to find its way into Sarita. And then you become aware that you're dreaming. The cougar, what do you make of that?
I think the cougar is the next expression of the Indian man who had been killed. The cougar is my instinctual side, my natural side that had been, destroyed by the kind of brutish, unconscious men. So I think the cougar is the restoration of that energy and that part of me. And he's coming home to me where I live. Yeah. So we're becoming integrated as a consequence of becoming aware of how I was mistreated this side of me. The put down of the body. So the cougar is like my physical incarnated side, which gives way to the last part because, of course, the hibiscus was like a celebration, right? Almost like a indication of fulfillment coming. And then the light appears, and then the transition from one light to the next shows the integration, Christ and Mary. But I think the last stage in particular, Mary Magdalene now is like the cougar. She's the grounded element in Christianity that we've never been able to incorporate. She's the wife of Jesus, according to some traditions, right? She's the tower. Magdalene means tower. And so she is like the cougar, like the Indian man. She's the grounded part of me who then reaches up into heaven and is integrated, you see, kind of like the union of heaven and earth. That's the consummation of the journey right there, right? It's the light and the earth being brought together.
And it reminds me of the previous dream we talked about with the woman who had been healed at the end of the dream, and she would be with you for all of eternity. And now in this dream, you have Mary the mother of Jesus, who you would say is like an eternal figure, and people still get visited by Mary to this day. One of the most remarkable spiritual phenomenon in the Western world has been the many, many visitations of Mary, and including Mary apparitions that have appeared. So Mary, sort of this eternal figure, and you have a dream that's referring to you being united in eternity with this woman. And then she leads you to Mary Magdalene in the tower, who you're feeling is an expression of this idea of uniting heaven and earth. Am I summarizing that fairly?
Beautiful. And it's interesting, I've written a book about encounters with Christ, and I've written a book about encounters with Mary, the mother. I'm with you always and blessed among women. But the third part, this Mary Magdalene part, I think is like saying, this is where you are now. This is the journey. And that is to tie everything together, your primitive nature, the light, and bring it all together into this tower, this symbol of connection between all realms, heaven and earth.
There are two things that have struck me as someone who's very interested in archetypal symbolism. So I got to go there. One is Jung said that powerful, intelligent animals in our dreams tend to represent the self. So as I read about the cougar, he would say that it's kind of a symbol of the archetypal self. And I think on some level that you could read that part of the dream that way. I really like your idea of the groundedness, bringing this spiritual nature into the groundedness of existence in body. The second thing was the spiral. Your tower's circular stairs, you're walking up them together. And that was another reference to the individuation path, because the circular movement of what you're doing and going upward it has a symbolic significance to it. Was there anything that you read of that as you look at that part of the dream that you would say has a symbolic significance? I mean, you talk about going up to unite heaven and earth. Is there anything else about that you would make note of?
Well, it's in a way, it's very masculine and very feminine. I mean, the tower itself is just an incredible edifice of earthy masculinity in a way, but the circular staircase is this beautiful, non-linear approach to the summit. So it just works on me. It's hard to put into words, side by side with Mary, the mother of Jesus, I climbed the tower dedicated to Mary Magdalene. It's like, whoa, it works on you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, you can, on one level, you can read it as the path of individuation. It's leading up in that spiral path, which is creating a circular shape. So, I mean, very, very suggestive of finding wholeness. But also where you're going up, which, I mean, and who's up? You're with Mary, the mother of Jesus. And then you're going towards Mary Magdalene, who was Jesus's wife in the Gnostic traditions. Kind of going up to heaven.
You can't make this stuff up, can you?
Well, Scott, that brings me up back to Jesus's question for you. Are you ready to go? You're going up into a tower to meet, with a holy figure, to meet another holy figure. Jung said that just before the end of his life, that he had an experience of going to a place where the masters resided, and he didn't want to go back, but the doctor, who was his cardiologist, came and grabbed hold of him, brought him back to earth so that he could complete his work. And I'm reminded of that there is this work that you have done. And in this dream, you're departing. I mean, you're leaving the ground. You're going to the masters. Do you see any allusions to that in the dream?
Well, all of the dreams seem to point to, death or surrender, the other life, like the first one, Jesus, are you ready to leave the earth? Yeah. No. So I stayed. So maybe I was on the verge of physical death. We don't know. Your mortal life is over. Well, I didn't die. That was 20 years ago. And this one was about 15 years ago. So obviously they're not talking about immediate literal departure, but I think, death in dreams, as we know, is always the threshold of arrival, right? It's like letting go of your limitations. And I'm always interested in that. I'm always trying to do that. So die daily, as Paul said, I die daily. That's my goal.
Dying to the ego self so that it can allow the deeper self to emerge. It brings us back to the Holy Grail and what that means in the Parsifal myth, the finding of oneself in the larger sense of that purpose in life and bringing forth the best of who and what you are to be of service to the world. And also just in a very simple, direct sort of way, your interactions with the people in life. The ways that we have a direct impact on the people who, some of them might be the people we live with or we're related to, and others might just be the people that we encounter in our day-to-day going from here to there, the clerk at the store,
Absolutely.
The student who's, in a classroom and then you run across as a teacher or something like that. Is there anything that you want to add to sort of bring all of this together? Because it seems like this last dream and our discussion of it is pulling together everything else that we've, at least the major threads of what we've already talked about. Would you like to put a bow on it to leave our listeners with something that's going to help them in their journey, in their path?
Well, I don't think I can improve on that dream, but I would recommend that people consider reading a couple of books that could be positively infectious and help them awaken and activate this capacity. One of them is Cosmic Consciousness by Richard Maurice Buck, B-U-C-K-E. That was written around the turn of the 20th century, not the 21st. Amazing book. When you read that, those are experiences of light. People, some historical, some famous, some unknown. It's a really powerful book. Another book is Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill. And she talks a lot about the light experience in that and how it's not the end of the road, it's the beginning. She makes a case that the initial illumination is the activation of the journey, not the end of it. So it'll keep you humble.
Our ability to penetrate into this, and we can only see so far from where we sit. And the intimations or the hints that have come to me about this is similar to that. It's like, oh, if you think this is cool, just wait until you see what comes next,
Yeah.
What an invitation down the rabbit hole. Thank you, Mr. Sparrow, for sharing that with us. I would like to leave them also with a URL. Do you think that dreamstar.community is where you would like them to go to? Or do you have another website where you would like to point listeners to if they want to connect with you in the community that you're building?
No, that'd be great because that's building and that's going to be a place where a lot of people intersect. It's not just about my ideas. It's going to be more about ecumenical, if you will, gathering place for dream workers and people seeking this kind of depth in dreaming.
I think there's a community that's being attracted to what you're able to teach about the way of the dream that is beyond just ordinary dream interpretation and analysis, which is an extraordinary thing in itself. And I say ordinary, but as we've learned from this discussion, there is more that we're being invited to. And what would we summarize it as, Scott? You're being invited to go into the light or to experience the light?
Yeah.
Well, I won't make any poltergeist jokes. Stay. Don't go into the light. Okay. Wonderful.
I just want to say I want to thank you and Stephen for the work you're doing. Your podcast is really awakening a lot of people.
Steve and I would like to send out a huge thank you to Professor Scott Sparrow. His remarkable decades-long journey of dreaming is an inspiration to us all because he's teaching us that we can have experiences like he has had. The knowledge he shared with us used to only be known among a relatively small group of devotees. Scott said that his motivation for giving this interview was to make more people aware of what's possible by cultivating their dream lives. That aligns perfectly with the mission of this podcast. And I would say, Scott, mission accomplished. I, for one, have been getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and meditating. And so far, my dreams have been telling me that I have more work to do and that there are some things from the past and things in the present that need to be dealt with. There are some attitudes of the ego, things like that. And it's bringing it up, and, I can't escape it, nor do I want to, because I'm learning that the work itself is the joy of it, that it's okay to have these complex divisions and to have things from within yourself that are yearning to be reunited, to see inside of ourselves where we are hurt or where we are incomplete. This is what the light wants of us. It's why we're here, so we can see into the cracks in ourselves. That's what lets the light in. We'd also like to thank our friend Leah Noel for playing the voice of heaven in the introduction. Her podcast, Innis Forgettance, tells a chilling story of spirits haunting a town and its people, possessing their bodies and stealing their souls. Leah took a novel that she wrote, narrated it, and turned it into a podcast. It's fascinating, and you can find it at her website, leah-noel.com. And we'd like to thank our guest composer, Weston Brown. He contributed some of the beautiful keyboard piano music that you heard during the podcast. He makes music mainly for meditation and relaxation, and you can find him on platforms like Insight Timer and websites like YouTube. He makes his music as a gift to the world. That's why we make this podcast. That's why Leah made her podcast. That's why Scott does his work in the world. We do it from our hearts, and we do it with a sense of joy and sharing. We want you to love what we do and to gain from it. So please give us your support where you can. Tell your friends about us, write a review, whatever. Or just love what we do and send us some good vibes. We appreciate it. So we have a question to leave you with. Are you ready for your anointing? You know what to do. For my co-host, Steve Ernenwine, I'm Jason DeBoard, and we wish you